Hello YouTube, Alpha White Wolf bringing you a kind of an off-the-cuff video. So I'm actually recording this before the video talking about the Custodes preview for the new Legio Custodes kit box coming out, and I needed to talk about this because when I saw that first image, I immediately thought, okay, I have to do it now because I've been wanting to do it for months now. Pause on the New Year preview, talk about this tank and how much I absolutely despise it. So before we get too far into this, YouTube pleasantries, if you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button because it helps us out. We've actually recently hit 1,000 subscribers, so that's an awesome milestone to reach. If you like the video, indicate so down below. And if you have anything you want to say, I have a feeling there's going to be quite a few people who have something to say. Please go ahead and leave that in the comments. So first off, the thumbnail that I'm planning for this, if I actually manage to pull it off, make no mistake, it is not clickbait. It is not anything where I'm just trying to farm engagement. It is an honest to God, I had to get this out because of how deep my loathing for this unit is. So for this video, I will start by having like a bit of a story behind it so that you can get some context as to why I don't like this unit so much. And then I'll go ahead and start talking about the actual numbers, the facts, the statistics as to why I don't like this unit. And then at the end, I'll do a kind of comparison between the Caladius and a unit that I'm currently going to be employing for my new army. And after that, I'm gonna be blunt about it. I'm gonna end this video with explaining how I would fix this unit into 11th edition, because from 9th to 10th, this unit got effectively ruined, and I can give you a very simple couple of explanations as to how I would fix this unit to actually make it work as it should be working from the first place. But in any case, the story and the background behind it. So I started building my Custodes army in around late 9th edition. I want to say about a half a year before 10th edition rolled out. And as I was building out my army, I was looking at what the army could do, its abilities, its units, its data sheets, everything. And I was really enthusiastic about being able to play the Golden Boys. I was really enthusiastic. I loved the martial kata system. Back in 9th, it was a little something to try and get my mind all around all of the things that you could do, but once I did, it was very straightforward for creating a plan of how I was going to use it. Then 10th edition rolled out, and obviously I started looking at the data sheets and realizing, okay, there are some changes here and there in order to make it palatable for the new audience, in order to make it work for this new edition. Let me go ahead and take a look through all of these data sheets because it's not exactly an enormous range, and let me see whether or not there's any changes I want to make to my army before I go any further. At that point, I had already kind of finished my first 6 Terminators, and I actually enjoy them a lot. It was a lot of fun painting them. I actually painted my first 6 Terminators, each one a different shield host. And it was a lot of fun being able to get practice with edge highlighting for black and cream colored armor. But as I was looking through the 10th edition Custodes data sheets, I remember this because I was able to kind of like reference it to one of the Kingsman movies, where I looked at the Caladius Grav-Tank datasheet. I was looking through all of its information on its weapons. I looked at its datasheet ability. I looked at all of this stuff. And my immediate reaction upon finishing reading through all of this was to snort derisively and then do a kind of like Tinder swipe left, because I looked at this datasheet and thought, this is a unit that is trying its hardest to attempt to be an anti-tank unit. It's not even attempting to be an anti-tank unit. It's trying to attempt to be an anti-tank unit. Like it has some neat little shiny portions to some of its abilities and weapon profiles, but there's just so much of a turd here that I'm not even going to bother with this. So I basically dismissed the Caladius Grav-Tank, continued looking through the data sheets, and ultimately decided, okay, not a whole lot of difference going on here. I'm just going to continue with what my initial plan was. And the results of that were about a year and a half, 2 years of being able to play Custodes with generally a 2-to-1 win-loss ratio, oftentimes being as many as 3-to-1 win-loss. So I was able to roll these guys pretty well. Then there came a point where I participated in a tournament, and I took a Alaris heavy list. This was before I really got into utilizing wardens or some of the other named characters. I was using it as custodian guard, basically do midfield stuff, a squad of prosecutors set on the home field objective and don't let it go. And then the Terminators go and chase down anything important in the enemy's army and make it stop existing. In that tournament, I had 2 wins and 1 loss. My best win that day was against an Imperial Guard player who brought 3, and I'm not sure if they were exactly Bane Blades, but they were some variant of that tank. He brought 3 of them. I had 12 Custodes in my army. 2 of them were basically kind of helping out the guard in order to do some no man's land enemy engagement stuff, but the other 10 were divided into 5-man squads, and they went after the 2 Caladius. They went after the 3 Bane Blades. The 2 Caladius was in my later army, but we'll get into that. But yeah, 2 5-man squads of Terminators going after a trio of Bane Blades. By the end of the match, 2 of the Bane Blades were in the scrap heap and 1 was on life support. Just to like have a moment to talk about this. There was someone who once tried to tell me that the Alaris Terminators were not a good unit in the Custodes army, and I legitimately looked at them and asked, "Are you stupid?" And then I told them the whole story about having like 2 5-man squads go up against 3 Bane Blades and only losing like 3 dudes. Losing 3 dudes, but putting 2 of the Bane Blades in the ground. It was insane to me that someone could honestly look at the Terminators in this army and go, yeah, these are just bad units. Like, no, absolutely not. Absolutely not. But that tournament, I also lost badly against Harlequins, and the player of that Harlequin army ended up recommending an army list that he said was really good. And as I was thumbing through it, and I'll actually like put the list in, I'll remake the list because I deleted it out of my Warhammer app, but I'll put the list back up. And when I initially was looking at it, I came across, okay, the Sisters of Silence units, he has 3 squads in here, and that was already like a bit of a bizarre, not quite red flag, but a weird thing that I looked at and went, that seems odd, but okay, let's see what you're going with. And then I saw he included 2 Caladius Grav-Tanks with the heavy blaze cannon, and I literally looked at them in that list and went, is this guy fucking with me? Because again, when I saw the Caladius in early 10th, I looked at it and dismissed it because the stuff on that datasheet was disappointing. And the datasheet, as far as I know, hasn't changed from early 10th to now. So it's still as disappointing on paper as it looked back then. So when this guy told me, hey, 2 Caladius tanks in this army, I looked at that and thought, okay, 2 possibilities. A, this guy's fucking with me. Or B, the Caladius is just so much better on tabletop than its datasheet would suggest. So I figured, okay, I'll go ahead, I'll give it a shot. I'll see what we're cooking with. Let's see what we're actually cooking with here. Built the list, managed to get a hold of 2 Caladius tanks, and started practicing with the army. This is the part of the story that, and I challenge you, before you even begin commenting, I challenge you, listen to this section to the end, and then try and come up with any way that you would run these tanks. Try and come up with any way that I haven't tried. 9 matches with this army list. Lost 7 of them. And the 2 that I won, the only reason I did was because I was really able to make use of the Custodian Warden's ability to essentially reduce wound rolls. The tanks never performed anywhere close to what they should have been as tank hunters. So, very first match I ever used the Caladius tanks on, I was up against the World Eaters. And I thought, okay, they're incorporating some armored units. They have a Rhino, they have some Hellbrutes, they have a Forge Fiend in the back. Okay, easy enough. I can have these tanks. This was, again, the very first time I ever used them. I'm going to use the tanks. I'm going to use my tank hunting units as tank hunters. I'm going to roll them up there, aim at the vehicles, fire, and the vehicles are either going to be gone or heavily damaged. Okay. First Caladius tank takes aim at the Hellbrute, fires everything, does 0 damage. Now initially I'm thinking, okay, maybe that's just some bad luck. It is a very small shot volume, so maybe it was just the luck wasn't on my side with that turn. Okay, turn 2, try again. Shoot everything, and even have backup from the second Caladius tank who has gotten into position and gotten this Hellbrute in its sights. Again, 2 Caladius Grav-Tanks are shooting at this single Hellbrute at the same time. Both tanks fire everything. Heavy blaze cannons and nose cannons. 0 damage. This was where the notion of, okay, this is just a bit of bad luck, started to crumble and was starting to be replaced with the beginnings of, this is just a bad unit. And by the time that I got like halfway to the second match, the notion of, oh, it's bad luck was gone, and it's just a case of, this must be either a bad unit or it's just, there's a specific way to play it that I'm not on yet. But yeah, the first match I ever used with them was an aggressive one. Lost that very badly, talked to the guy who recommended the army list and asked him, hey, what's going on here? He recommended, okay, don't run them out there, hold them in the back, hold them behind buildings, and then by turn 2, poke their noses out and fire at the enemy. Okay. To reiterate, the tanks are staying in my deployment zone. Safe and sound, tucked away behind buildings, no one able to shoot them not able to shoot anyone else. And by turn 2, when the enemy is starting to fill into no man's land, bring the tanks out, have them half behind a building to get benefit of cover from return fire, fire at the enemy, and try and destroy no man's land enemies there. Sound plan, except we ran into the same problem. The tanks would shoot and do no damage. Before I actually get too far into this, I need to circle back to that first match. The first match, the 2 Caladius, one of them did no damage at all throughout the entire 5 turns, and the other one only managed to do a grand total of 5 points of damage. And the only reason that one tank did any damage at all was because when it got destroyed, it got deadly demise, did 3 damage to one enemy unit and 2 damage to another. A 215 point tank did no damage to anything the entire match until it got blown up. I needed to reference that because, again, it's a case of at some point you gotta think bad luck transitions into this is a bad unit. But yeah, back to like the second match where I started really having the realization of, oh, this is just an awful unit. No matter what I did, and no matter how conservatively I played, if I had my tank half behind a building, sure, I get benefit of cover from return fire, but so does the enemy. The enemy gets benefit of cover from my fire. So I'm already having a reduced AP. I can't do any damage with this thing because it just doesn't have the shot volume to make that feasible. And even with benefit of cover, the enemy fires back at my guy, at my tank, and takes off like a quarter of its health, a third of its health easily. And I'm just looking at this and going, what in the world? The tactic of hold back and then poke the nose out from turn 2 on, that was a strategy that I used for 6 of those 9 games. Trying it on various maps, trying it with various deployment zone layouts, trying it with everything and anything that I could to make it work. And the same exact thing happened every single time, no matter what I tried to do. It would shoot at an enemy, and if I was lucky, it would maybe do a couple points of damage. In all likelihood, what happened was it would do no damage. I can only remember 2 instances where a Caladius fired at an enemy vehicle and it did double-digit damage. It did more than 9 points. Only 2 instances across 9 games. So yes, of the 9 games that I played, 6 of them were played under the strategy of keep them conservative until turn 2, poke their noses out so they can still get benefit of cover, fire at the enemy, which of course didn't work because they can't do damage. Only the first match was run them out there aggressively, attack the enemies because tank hunters are going to go hunt tanks. That was my logic. Didn't work because the tanks couldn't do damage. At least one instance of me holding back the Caladius until turn 3 when I started having enemy units basically crossing the front border of my deployment zone, and ironically I was able to get some really good damage with tank shock. The guns still did virtually nothing, but I was able to charge the tanks in there and get some tank shock going. So I guess kudos there. And there was at least one instance where I had the tanks in strategic reserve and then brought them in onto the side of the board in order to try and like double team other vehicles. And once again, the same exact problem happened all over again. No matter what I did, the ultimate problem was they did no damage. No matter how you play them, my issue always was that when I rolled, there was no damage that reached the enemy. Or if there was any damage, it was the kind of damage that I could outperform with the bolt casters of my Guardian Spears. I kid you not, I actually played against a Tau player. I shot the Caladius Blaze Cannon into a Storm Surge, did no damage whatsoever, but a 5-man squad of Wardens with their bolt guns on their Guardian Spears managed to actually do 6 points of damage. I can't even say that they did 6 times the number of damage, the 6 times the points of damage, because again, the Caladius did 0, and 6 times 0 is still 0. I somehow am able to have better anti-tank from the infantry carried guns than I get from the one singular unit in this entire army lineup that is marketed and advertised as this is the anti-tank ranged option for the Custodes. And I'm not able to get any damage from it. Ever. So yes, to recap, 9 matches, 7 losses, and 2 wins. The 2 wins, the tanks did very little to actually aid in the wins. The strategies for those 9 matches, 6 of the 9 was be conservative until turn 2 and start poking the nose out to fire. 1 was be aggressive, which failed. Another one was wait until turn 3, the barbarians are at the gates, start firing, failed. And another one was strategic reserve, bring them in the side, shoot at the enemy, which failed. So yes, if you have a suggestion for how I could potentially play these tanks that I haven't already listed, I'd be more than happy to hear it. And it wasn't even just the strategy that I changed up. I went through 5 different sets of dice and 3 different dice trays to try and see whether or not it was just the actual physical logistics of what I was doing, and still never failed. The tanks always failed to do damage, but for some reason, all of the other units had a pretty standard spread of statistics. There were still some failures there, of course, but it wasn't as abysmal as the Caladius. So ultimately, the story here is that the Caladius across 9 matches did very little good to the army and basically served as a total of 430 points of dead weight that the rest of my army had to try and drag around to make anything worthwhile happen. So yeah, that's just That's just the story portion. I will get into explaining exactly why I dislike the Caladius tank. So looking at the Caladius Grav-Tank in 10th edition, its stat line is actually not too bad when you look at it. 10 inches of movement with 11 toughness, a 2-up armor and 5-up invul, 14 wounds with a degrading stat line, 6-up leadership, and 4 objective control. Okay, not a bad lineup right there, not a bad stat. So, all in all, the stats here look pretty good. The 5-up invulnerable save was actually the first thing that kind of caught my eye and made me go, eh. A 5-up invulnerable save is fine, but anyone who's ever played the Custodes, either with or against, will tell you that the Custodes army lives and dies by its 4-up invulnerable save. A 5-up is... it doesn't look as impressive when you don't know what it is, but when you've actually played it, it feels much more impactful than a single number of difference. In terms of its abilities, it has Deadly Demise D3, it has Martial Kata, which, again, hilarious to me that the tank knows Kung Fu. It has the ability to get lethal hits on non-monsters and non-vehicles if it's using its Accelerator Cannon, and lethal hits on monsters and vehicles with its Blaze Cannon. I'll get into why I look at this. I looked at this portion and thought, that's stupid, and I'll get into that in just a moment. The unit composition has twin Accelerator Cannons as the standard, a twin Lastrum Bolt Cannon, the nose gun, and its armored hull. It comes in at 215 points, and will suffer a -1 to hit when it has 1 to 5 wounds remaining. In terms of its war gear, it has, again, the standard of the Accelerator Cannon with Rapid Fire 4 and Twin Linked, 48-inch range, 4 shots, hitting on 2s, Strength 10, AP 1, Damage 3. The Lastrum Bolt Cannon has Sustained Hits 1, 36-inch range, 3 attacks, hitting on 2s, Strength 6, AP 1, Damage 1. I'm not even going to talk about the Armored Hull because that's not important here. However, you can replace the Accelerator Cannon with a Heavy Blaze Cannon, which is Twin Linked, 48-inch range, 4 shots, hitting on 2s, Strength 12, AP 3, Damage D6 plus 2. Now, this is where things are going to almost come across as a bit rambly, because I did a lot of work to validate and prove my point here. So, when I looked at this datasheet in early 10th, I looked at the 5-up invul and thought, not impressed by that, but let's see what else it has. I looked at the datasheet rule, snorted. That was actually where the snort of derision kind of really came from. And then I looked at the Heavy Blaze Cannon, which was obviously the one that you would want to use for hunting tanks. And I saw that 4. I saw the A column and I saw the 4 in this, and I thought, yeah, no, absolutely not. Skip. The point cost didn't even factor into the decision at that point. It was those 3 things combined created a situation where it was just not worth taking this thing. And let me explain why. So, when you look at the Heavy Blaze Cannon and you look at the datasheet ability, there are 2 abilities, one in each one of those, that basically are butting heads violently. Twin Linked and Lethal Hits. Now, for those of you who don't know, Lethal Hits is you roll your d6 to attack, in this case 4 of them, and any 6, if you're targeting a monster or vehicle with the appropriate gun, that 6 auto wounds. You don't need to roll a wound roll. It's like, okay, I could work with that. Twin Linked allows you to reroll the wound roll. Now, I can understand that there's a degree of redundancy here, but the simple fact of the matter is the biggest problem with the Heavy Blaze Cannon ultimately is its shot volume. That was the issue that I kept running into on a constant basis. The shot volume was so low that any ones basically were devastating. It's the equivalent of... So, Custodes players will tell you that the trade-off of having such powerful individual models is that each loss hits that much harder. So with that in mind, when you look at 4 attacks on a gun this powerful, on that hit roll, any one hits that much more devastatingly. It's just awful. And lethal hits, I'm going to be frank here. When I saw the lethal hits, I was like, this is just not the kind of weapon you want that ability on. You don't want that kind of ability here. And let me explain why. I approach games like this in a somewhat mathematical way. So for me, I will actually be able to back up what I say with actual numbers, distances, hit, wound, or saving throw rolls, the likelihoods of these things. And I will be able to look at that and start going, okay, where is the likelihood and where is the advantages and where are the disadvantages? For lethal hits, my thing has been this. Lethal hits, depending on the wound roll, will change how I feel about it. So for example, if you're giving me lethal hits on weapons that are going to get a wound roll of 6. So if you gave me lethal hits on bolt guns against a Lehman Russ, oh heck yeah, I'm all for it. Absolutely. Put that shit into my veins, man. That's the kind of situation where lethal hits becomes incredibly useful. Wound roll of 5, okay, still really good. I will still happily take that. The moment you get to the offer of lethal hits on a wound roll of 4 is when I start going, okay, fine, but do you got anything else? Like, I'm genuinely starting to look around for other things, because at that point it's just, why would I bother getting this? Because at that point, at a wound roll of 4, lethal hits just starts looking more like a crumb being thrown your way. Wound roll of 3, that is the point for me where lethal hits has officially become just the crumbs that someone throws your way to try and shut you up. Wound roll of 2, you offer me lethal hits on that, it suddenly becomes a case of, this is on the verge of just being offensive. This is insulting that you gave me this. Like, I'm almost guaranteed to wound anyway, and you're making it so that instead of being able to give me something useful, you gave me something like, you gave me a whatever rule. And all of that is before we even talk about Twin Linked. Twin Linked basically takes every one of those criteria, every one of those standards, and shifts them up slightly. Because I'm already re-rolling the wound roll. I'm already having an incredibly high strength. I'm already really good on this front. I don't need this. And just to make sure that no one has anything to say about this, so this is a spreadsheet that I initially started with the intent of documenting all of the factions across the game, detailing what unit, what faction they belong to, whether they were monster or vehicle, and then their toughness. I ended up stopping at the Imperial factions because I realized the numbers were already siding with me, and going through the rest of the factions would have only hammered my case further home. So I was able to identify 127 vehicles across the Imperial factions, with multiple instances of the Rhino across Sisters of Battle, Sisters of Silence, Space Marines, Grey Knights, and I think Imperial Agents, yes, up here. But yeah, 127 vehicles, down to 122 if you don't want to include the Rhino variants, but I'm going to include them because they do count as their own individual thing in their respective factions. In the calculations, I was able to find a grand total of 10 Imperial units in the entirety of the Imperial factions that had a toughness of 13 or higher. And just to show you, here we are. We have 2 Acastus Pattern Knights, a Warhound Titan, and 7 variants of the Baneblade. So a grand total of roughly 8% of all Imperial vehicles are toughness 13, which to remind you, toughness 13 just means that, okay, the Caladius would actually need a 5 or higher to wound this thing. At that point, with Twin Linked, I'm looking at that and going, okay, absolutely love that, would absolutely go for that. No problem whatsoever there. 20 units of toughness 12, which, yeah, you can kind of see here some Custodes units from Forge World, a bunch of various heavier vehicles from Space Marines, the Rogel Dorn battle tank, the Dominus Pattern Knights, and then a couple of the vehicles from Grey Knights. Yeah, toughness 12 for them. Yeah. Wounding on 4s. A grand total of 15%. 74% roughly. Toughness 7 to 11. 95 data sheets across Imperial factions that would require a wound roll of 3 or higher. And again, this is the part where lethal hits to me just starts coming across as progressively more offensive and insulting. Also, just to make sure that anyone who tried to reference them knows that they were actually identified, there were 4 examples of vehicles that were T6 or below, and that was actually kind of surprising, but then I remembered roughly what they were, and it kind of made sense. Mortifiers and Penitent engines from Sisters of Battle, the Firestrike servo turrets from Space Marines, and the Cyclops demolition tank from the Militarum. Basically the remote control tank that they fill with explosives and drive at the enemy and intentionally blow up. So yes, I made sure that when it came to this spreadsheet that I did my due diligence, that I made sure everything checked out as best I could. And on the topic of toughness 13 models, there are only 4 other examples that I can think of. For some reason, this is the part where I was playing Helldivers a lot. Part of me wants to call it the Bile Titan, but it's definitely not that. The giant Titan-sized bug from the Tyranids. The Stompa from the Orcs. The Wraith Lord, I think, from the Eldar. And then the Lord of Skulls from Chaos Space Marines / World Eaters. So, looking at all of this, you start realizing that only 14 units in the entire game require a wound roll of 5 or higher for the Caladius tank. Now again, I understand that this is just how I kind of do things, but for me, I'm able to actually put numbers to notions and be able to express them that way. So for me, again, wounding on 5s, yeah, I would love lethal hits on that. The fact that it's just over a dozen units across the whole game, and in the case of the Warhound Titan, it's unlikely you ever see that thing. Yeah, it's not likely that you're going to actually run into something where lethal hits becomes all that useful. Wounding on 4s is where it officially for me becomes a case of I wish that there was something else that could potentially give me a better advantage. Wound roll of 3 or 2 is just lethal hits becomes for me just counterproductive at that point. But yeah, this was a spreadsheet that I created with the express purpose of discussing that. And the reason why I stopped at the Imperial factions again was because these numbers, they are as good as they can get for the Caladius tank. If I were to incorporate the numbers from the other factions, this number would just go down, because like this number would maybe go up a little bit, but this number would skyrocket to probably 80-85%, if not 90%. Because think about how many vehicles are toughness 7 to 11. This would definitely be 80s at bare minimum, and maybe up to 90 if a bunch of if more vehicles than I suspect are in this age, in this toughness range. And it's just, this is as good as it's going to be in favor of the Caladius, and it's still, in my opinion, quite damning against it. But there is not just complaints, there is a solution, and I will reference that by comparing it to its 9th edition counterpart. So here we have the Caladius Grav-Tank as it was in 9th edition. And overall, it was still a product of its time. This was before the vehicles got their toughness spike that made the old strength scores a little bit more difficult to justify, let's say. But here, for the heavy blaze cannon, there's actually something very interesting. There is a alternate profile in the blaze cannon where you can increase the number of shots. And this, for me, is the kind of thing where I look at it and go, okay, that is a good way to go about this. The way I would fix this, and I'm not even going to be humble about this, if I had the authority to change this around, this would be how I would go into it, and I would expressly call it, I am fixing this and making it as it should be. The Blaze Cannon would have 2 profiles, and this would be one of them. This would be your long-range, high-impact profile. I would incorporate a second profile in the Blaze Cannon that basically had, instead of d6 plus 2 damage, flat 3. That is a very fair compromise. 3 is the minimum damage you can do with this current gun anyway, so that's something that should make it a little bit more appealing to people who might be against the idea. But don't worry, once I get to what I would replace this, and once I get to what I replace it with, I'm willing to bet there will be a lot more people who would be on my side for this recommendation. But yeah, alternate profile where there's just flat 3 damage, AP, strength, and ballistic skill remain the same, but in exchange for minimum damage, double the shots. And if the deal needs to be sweetened, sacrifice 24 inches of range. I don't mind having this thing basically be a case of half range, double shots, minimum damage, because at that point, this longer range one would almost become like the hazardous profile on plasma weapons. I acknowledge you exist. Now go away. Oh, also make sure you keep twin link. That's a vital portion. So twin linked ballistic skill, strength, and AP remaining the same. Halved, minimum, and double. So half range, minimum damage, double shots. That for me would be something that I would be much more open for having in this profile. Having a second profile underneath this with that kind of thing, I would never not be using that thing. Because it also fits in with how people would tell you how to play this tank. They would tell you, play it conservative, play it close to the chest. And then once the enemy gets a little bit closer, within 24-inch range, you poke your nose out and you fire. I cannot think of anyone who would honestly have that strategy in mind, who would think, yeah, I wouldn't want to have 24-inch range, 8 shots with this gun profile. I would not want that. You're lying to yourself at that point. You're absolutely lying to yourself. But the real kicker is what I would replace the datasheet ability with. I would replace the datasheet ability with, first off, get rid of this lethal hits nonsense. You can have lethal hits in a moment. I'll explain how. But you basically replace this with the ability to have alternative pieces of war gear. The datasheet ability would allow you to replace your bolt cannon, your little nose gun, with one of 3 items. Each item has a point value of 10 extra points. So if you went with this, you would add on 10 points. Now you can completely ignore it if you wish, but this, again, is one of those things that once you hear these options, you'd probably never bother with the bolt cannon in the first place. The 3 alternate pieces of war gear would be, again, 10 points each. You can only choose one, and they're 10 points apiece. You could either spend 10 points on a shield generator, which would basically turn that invulnerable save of 5 to a 4. Now, anyone who is against this notion, I want you to think about that for a moment and ask yourself if you would honestly turn down a Caladius tank with a 2-up armor, 4-up invul save. If you would honestly look at that kind of stat line and say, no, I prefer lethal hits. No. Again, stop lying to yourself. The invulnerable save is where you want to go with that. But if you do want the lethal hits, if you're so dead set on that, I already have you covered there. I already got you covered, baby. The second piece of war gear, again, 10 points, targeting array. A targeting array that, if you select this piece of war gear, again, boost the cost of the model to 225, but at the beginning of the game, you choose one of 4 abilities that are active for your weapons. You choose either lethal hits, if you really want it, sustained hits, ignores cover, or dev wounds. So basically taking the same concept here, letting you have it if you want it, but giving you other options. And again, for 10 extra points, pretty fair deal. If anything, a pretty nice steal, in all honesty. The third optional war gear. And this is one of those ones that, in all honesty, you could have this thing be an extra 15 or even 20 points and you'd still have people going for it. A repair geist. Basically, like, make the fluff like a tech priest servo skull that decided to have themselves be actually turned into a piece of equipment to fit onto a Custodes tank. And the function of this war gear is it basically gives the Caladius tank the Imperial equivalent of reanimation protocols. Beginning of each turn, at the end of the command phase, if the Caladius tank is injured, it's able to heal D3 wounds. That's the kind of one where if you charge 20 points for it, you would still have a rabid fan base going for it and willingly, eagerly throwing it on there in order to make their tanks tougher. So yes, if I wanted to try and fix this unit, I would incorporate a shorter range, less damage, but greater shot volume profile for the blaze cannon, and I would replace this datasheet ability with essentially a war gear sheet ability where you have the option to replace the bolt cannon for a few extra points on the model cost and improve upon your vehicle, improve its toughness, improve its survivability, or just improve its offensive power. I'm going to end this video, and again, it was kind of off the cuff. There's no script here. I'm going to end this video by comparing it to my current army's anti-tank option. So here we have the Doomsday Arc. I've started a Necron's army, and I'm actually coming close to completing my 1,000 point list and then expanding it into my 2K list. But the Doomsday Arc is, when you compare it to the Caladius Grav-Tank, you start realizing that for some reason Games Workshop has applied a Forge World point tax on any of its Forge World models. Because frankly, the Doomsday Arc has abilities, weaponry, and honestly stat lines that are at bare minimum equal to, if not better than, the Caladius, and it's 15 points cheaper. So in terms of the stat line, the Doomsday Arc does come up a little bit short in comparison to Caladius, I will admit. Same movement, but 2 less toughness, a 3-up armor and 4-up invulnerable save, 14 wounds with a degrading stat line, 7 leadership, and objective control of 5. So in terms of the stat line, the Caladius does have a slight edge because of that toughness and leadership, but the fact that the 4-up invulnerable save is on the Doomsday Arc is one of those things where it's just a case of, I mean, again, it may be only a single number of difference between a 5 and a 4-up, but people who've actually played will tell you that single point of difference can actually make or break entire games. So the Doomsday Arc, I would say, is almost on par with the Caladius, and the Caladius is nowhere near as far ahead as it would like to think it is. In terms of abilities, the Doomsday Arc has Deadly Demise D3 as well. It has the reanimation protocol, so it automatically repairs itself slightly at the beginning of each of my turns. Its datasheet ability, however, and I'm going to mention this a lot more, is something that ties in with its main gun so much more nicely. If you remain stationary in your movement phase, then until the end of the turn, the Doomsday Cannon has dev wounds, which is insane. The Doomsday Arc comes equipped with a Doomsday Cannon and 2 Gauss Flare arrays, along with its armored bulk, coming in at 200 points and only suffering a degraded hit roll when it is at 1 to 5 wounds remaining. Now, not going to be concerned about the armored bulk. These are meant to be more gunships than anything else, but it's still something worth noting that the Doomsday Cannon with this datasheet ability and its own abilities on top of that just creates this beautiful interlocking of abilities and capabilities for this unit. And here's what I mean. The Doomsday Cannon, 72-inch range, D6 plus 1 attacks, hits on 3s, strength 18, AP minus 4, so melt-a-gun AP instead of plasma gun like the Caladius, and damage 4. So, sure, the Caladius has a chance of doing 8 points of damage, but it also has the chance of doing as little as 3 points. And when you consider how few shots it has a very high chance of doing 0 damage. Now, remember how I mentioned the datasheet ability and the weapon abilities tie into each other so beautifully? The Doomsday Cannon with its heavy ability means that as long as it stays put, it gets a +1 to its hit roll. So if you park it somewhere halfway behind a building where it can still fire down some lanes on the battlefield, you get to go from ballistic skill 3 up to ballistic skill 2 up. And again, if it remains stationary, then the Doomsday Cannon will also gain dev wounds as an ability. So you have the weapon abilities and the datasheet ability merging into each other so beautifully and so seamlessly that it creates a really dangerous unit to be hunting tanks with. Additionally, the blast profile is interesting, so it's one of those things that I'm looking at and going, okay, odd, but more silly than anything else. Because personally, I love the idea of using the Doomsday Cannon. I mean, I'm going to attach a picture into this. The Doomsday Cannon almost seems like the gun for the A10 Warthog, where it's just almost unnecessarily large. So using that to target infantry to get that blast off is just, it's hilarious, but it's one of those things where it's a case of there's no overkill quite like overkill. There's no kill quite like overkill, you know? There's no kill quite like overkill. So you have a very high chance of being able to get at least equal to or greater shots. The strength is so high that basically anything in the game, and I genuinely do believe that there's nothing in a 2K list that you can possibly have that is going to require even a 4-up to on the wound roll with this thing. I can't think of any model that you could have in a 2K game that has a toughness high enough to warrant a 4-up on this gun. You're wounding everything on a 3 and quite a few things on a 2. You have melt-a-gun AP, so that even if you're hiding behind a building, that melt-a-gun AP just goes down to what the Caladius Grav-Tank has normally. And it's so insane to me how good this unit is, and it's 15 points less. It's so insulting to the Caladius. If the Caladius was like 175 with its current stuff, I would be more receptive to it. But the fact that the Doomsday Arc is able to do this much better, this much more easily, is just, come on, these are the Custodies. You should be better than this, guys. But yes, this is the comparison that I'm currently working with. And when I started looking at this, I started realizing that, oh, Forge World is pretty much an entire scam. Gotcha. I don't know how I feel about that. I will say this though, I do feel really good about trying to play the Doomsday Arc when I have the army completed. I am really looking forward to this. And honestly, it looks like it's going to be a lot of fun to play. It looks like it's going to be a lot of fun to park somewhere with the full knowledge that people are going to try and shoot at it, but are going to run into that invulnerable save and that reanimation protocol, and the fact that in my army list I'm planning on having a reanimator construct there, a canoptic reanimator. So this thing, if it gets hurt, is going to have 2d3 reanimation dice going on. You're not likely to destroy it very easily. But yeah, this has been a kind of off the cuff rambling thing where I had to get this off my chest because I have such a strong negative opinion for the Caladius, but I knew that I needed to make sure that I had all my ducks in a row to make sure that anyone who had this fanboy notion, this rosy tinted glasses for the Caladius, would be able to know that I'm coming from this from a mostly objective perspective. This is my experiences playing with it. This is the numbers on its data sheet, the numbers in comparison with other data sheets. This is just This is not me just being a whiner about the situation. This is me pointing out problems with a unit that other people have tried to tell me is better than it actually is. But that's going to be it for this video. If you like the video, indicate so down below. If you have anything to say about this video, which, considering how big of a fan base the Caladius has, I'm sure there's going to be at least a few people who have something to say. And if you're new to the channel, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. I've been Alpha White Wolf. I'm signing off. You keep howling, Wolfpack.